Hi there, Leah. We are just waiting to see if anybody else joins us today for the Tips and Tricks webinar. I think a lot of people were just busy with Thanksgiving and everything. So we are going to go ahead and just do the run through, and then we'll also have that recap video at the end as well. So anybody that didn't get to join us live will also have the video for them to watch later. So I'm just going to give it maybe about 2 more minutes, and then I'm going to go ahead and get started. So wait about 2 more minutes, and I hope that everyone is having a wonderful pre-Thanksgiving weekend, or week as it were. But today we are going to be going over some of our new features, one of which is going to be launching today for our beta testers. So the first feature is going to be our subdomains, and then we're going to go right into our new form builder. So I'm just going to go ahead and share my screen. All right. So what you're seeing now is actually our forms list page. This is where all of your forms are going to live. So when we talk about forms, what we're talking about are like intake forms. Maybe you have a feedback survey, an outro form, if you will. You can have multiple forms in here. So for example, you can have one for just a general intake form, one for weddings, one for corporate, one for funeral, maybe a feedback survey or so. So you can have multiple different forms in here. And let me go ahead, I'm going to switch back over to our test company here so that we can go ahead and make a form live here on our Tips and Tricks webinar. So as I'm going through this, I also did want to mention that we are going to be going over subdomains. So for anybody that hasn't already gotten their subdomain, you can definitely feel free to sign up for that. We are going to go over kind of how that will play into our forms here. If you are already on a subdomain, that means that you already have that right now. It's hosting your proposal PDFs. In addition to that, it's also going to host your forms. So let's go ahead and just dive in. The first thing that I'm going to want to do when I come to the screen is to create a new form. So I'm going to click on my Create New Form button here. And then I'm going to give my form a name. So this can be anything you want it to be. Maybe it's something generic, just like wedding intake form or general intake form. You will, when you get this feature, start off with both a wedding intake form and a general intake form. So those are going to be preloaded into the template section of your forms. But if you're starting from scratch, you're going to go ahead and put in your form name here. The next options that we have are, do we want this form to be active for people to go ahead and fill it out, or do we not? You can, of course, make it not active, and then when you're ready, you can activate the form, or you can start right off the bat with active. One of the things that I like to focus on here is that the form is going to be hosted from a URL. So that could be your custom vanity URL that you create when you choose your subdomain. Otherwise, it's going to say portal.details.flower/forms, I want to say. So in order for somebody to actually get to this form, they would have to have that link. So even if I make it active now, if I'm not hosting the link anywhere, like let's say if I don't link it to my website in a photo or in a general link, no one's going to have access to it from the get-go anyways. So you can choose to make that active or not. Personally, I'm going to go ahead and make it active because if you're like me, you're going to forget. And then I have my create event toggle here. So for different types of forms, you may or may not want it to create an event. In the case of, let's say, an intake form, I'm probably going to want that to always create an event. I want it to pull the information that that client puts onto my form directly into an event, so I don't have to go in and do all the manual entry. In the case of, let's say, a feedback survey or an outro form, I don't really want that to populate into an event, but I do want to still have those responses as a submission. So in that case, I may want to not create an event. In this case, I'm going to go ahead and toggle yes to create an event because it's going to be our wedding intake form. Next, I'm going to go over into the advanced tab here. And then I have a couple of different options here. So the first one is going to be multiple submissions. If this is going to be kind of like a one-time form, they're going to go in, fill out their information, it's going to populate the event, and they're probably never going to look at it again. You may not want to have multiple submissions. If it's in a case of, let's say, like a general intake form, so maybe they're going to do a wedding right now, a year later they might come back and put in another intake form for like an anniversary party. Maybe they want to hire you to do a birthday. So in that case, you might want to turn on the multiple submissions. What it's looking for there is really going to be the identifier of email address. So let's say the bride comes in and fills it out with her email address, and it recognizes the IP address on her computer. It's going to say, okay, you already filled it out once, you can't fill it out again, unless you have the multiple submissions on. Aside from that, though, if there's another person in the party that wants to come in and fill out the form from their computer, different email address, then the multiple submissions doesn't apply. So kind of just up to you if you want to do multiple submissions or not. And then I have my open and close date. So some forms, and I would say most forms, especially if it's going to be like your wedding form or your intake form, you're likely going to want that to have an open date, but not a close date. You're going to want that to live on your website till the end of time, and you can go in and make multiple iterations of it, update it, rebrand it. So in that case, I would put an open date, but not a close date. If it's a type of form that you're only going to want to have out there for a certain amount of time, so maybe I'm just doing like a poll of what people like about my shop, or what offerings they like versus not, maybe I want to put an open and close date on that. In this case, though, like I said, I'm going to go ahead and put just an open date, but leave the close date kind of open. So I'm going to choose today as my open date. Next, I can go ahead and have it automatically create an event name. So when we talked about, is this form going to create an event in details or is it not? When I go in to do a form, I want it to automatically create me an event name. Now, likelihood is I'm not going to want this event name to be the same for every person, because it would just be confusing on the event list. You would have the differentiator between, let's say, their event dates, the created date, the client name, but ultimately all of your event name would be the same. So in that case, you can use what are called tokens to automatically create an event name based on the information that they fill out on the form. So if you guys are familiar with tokens, we are utilizing tokens both in our contract terms and then also now in the new proposal settings menu. If you're not utilizing those features there, I highly recommend that you do so. If you go onto either one of those pages, there's going to be a button there to learn more about the different token options for each additional section. In this case, though, my event name, I might want it to be something like, let's say, their location of the event. Maybe I want it to be client last name and then the location, or maybe I want it to be the event date. So whatever that looks like for you guys, you can go ahead and use tokens to do so. In my case, I'm just going to go ahead and put client name, and that's going to be my event date. There are a multitude of different token options. Separate from, let's say, what you would use on either your contract terms or your proposal settings. There are some similarities in the token options, but the forms do have their own special set of tokens that you can use there as well. So we do have a support center article that will be linked here. It's not linked yet, but it will be, and then that way you guys can just click it, open the support center article, and automatically look at the different options there and copy and paste it right in here to the event name. And the last thing here is going to be a forms URL slug. So a slug is basically additional verbiage on the end of your URL. So in the case of, let's say, this right here, our details.flower/forms, the /forms here, that's going to be my slug. So maybe I want that to be something a little bit more like this is a slug. That whole back end there of the URL is going to be a slug. So just kind of some options there. Another way to really just elevate your branding experience for your customer, if you wanted to put in some additional verbiage there at the end of your URL or URL, excuse me. All right, and then once you're done with all that, you're going to go ahead and click on Save. So from there, it's going to take you into the form itself. So when we get onto the form there, we're going to go over all of the different options here, some things that I would recommend that you always put on a form, some things that might be specific to the type of form that you're creating. And then we'll also go over our defaults here. So first, I want to go over individual page settings. So there are two different types of default settings. One is going to be for an individual page, and one is going to be for the form in general. So that can be every page, every element that you have on here, or field, as it were. Here on the page list, though, next to each page, I'm going to have this little pencil icon. So if I click on my pencil icon here, a page is going to pop up for me to select all of my options here for the form. So this is, again, going to be for just this welcome page. So if I do anything here, it's not also going to update my, my thank you page at the end either. I'm going to have to do that separately. So this is going to be a great way to, let's say, have multiple different styles of pages in one form. If you're wanting everything to be all inclusive and everything to kind of have the same look, same background, same kind of like font format, etc., then you'll want to do that in your full defaults, which we'll go over in just a minute. So here on my page defaults, I can go ahead and change the page name. Maybe I don't want it to say welcome page. Maybe it's, you know, page 1, or however that looks like for you. The one thing that I do want to mention, though, is whatever you put here as your page name is going to show up at the top, kind of the tab there, if you will. So your client will be able to see this. So you definitely want to make sure that it's going to be something well branded, if you will. And then here on my background image, I can select an image there for just this page. I'm just going to go ahead and click on that choose image space. It's going to automatically prompt me to choose from my computer, or I can also do that from an internet URL. This is going to be the same process as you take when, let's say, you're going in to add an inspiration photo, or maybe it's a photo for your recipes. All of that is going to be using the same functionality. So you'll go ahead and you can choose your images there from either computer internet URL. It's going to pop up with your kind of like finder thing. It's called something different for each platform. So in iOS, it's going to be the finder. From there, though, I can go ahead and enter in my photo there, and it would populate accordingly. I'm going to want this to be the same for all of my pages, so I'm not going to do it here in my individual page, but we will look and see how that appears when we get to the main defaults. Next is going to be padding. So this is just going to be the space, if you will, between the very top of the page and where your form starts. Same thing with the bottom, very bottom of the page and where your form ends. And then you also have things like your text color and your background color. So in the case of, let's say I wasn't using a background image, I might want to instead do a background color. As far as text color, though, that's going to be like your field titles. So where it says email address, and then next to that is going to be a field for them to actually fill in their email. This is going to be the text color where it would say email address. And then also on text here, we have our page font. So if you're familiar with the new font option that you have on the proposal settings menu, this is the exact same feature, if you will. So if I click on that, I'm going to be able to select any one of the different fonts. I can choose between category, family, and variant. So variant is going to be like bold, italic, etc. I can also change my font size here. And then again, bold, italicized, and strike through down here as well. All right, so if I don't want to do this on an individual page by page basis, and I want to do this for, let's say, all of the pages that I have included in my form, I can go up to the menu button at the top. I'm going to go to Form Defaults, And then from there, I can choose a background image if I would like. So if I choose an image here from my page defaults, let's say, it's going to automatically add this same background to every single one of my pages that are included in this specific form. So once this loads here, I'm going to be able to use that image, and it's going to populate for all of my pages, like I said. Then I also have the option to change my default font here. So if I wanted to change my default font to a different font. And then I also have some additional color options. So at the bottom there, my navigation bar. So this is going to be for your client view anyways. It's going to say next or submit. So depending on the number of pages that you have, you'll either have like a next or a back button to go back and forth between the different pages. And then you'll also at the very end have a submit button. So you can change what the background looks like. So that's where the buttons sit, and then also the buttons themselves. So you can choose from any color in the spectrum. These are basically like the Pantone spectrum. So you can go in there and select any colors that you would like. That's going to really elevate your form, especially if you have like a very niche color scheme for your branding. You can go in there and change those buttons as well. Then we have options such as our input defaults. So when we talk about input, what we're talking about is the client. So this is going to be the field that the client is going to enter in their information. So it's going to have an input background color. So the field itself would change color. And then you have an input text. So that's going to be where they're typing in Mary for their first name, and Mary would show up in that specific color you choose. Then we also have our page defaults here. So again, if I wasn't using a background image, I could choose a background color. I could choose text color for my labels for each one of my forms. And then again, I've got that padding top and bottom that I can adjust. In addition to that, in my component defaults, I also can choose if I wanted my fields or my elements to have different border styles. So if I wanted to put a border around each one of my different elements, I could choose a style. So that's going to be all of these available options here. I can also choose the thickness that I want. So maybe I want it to be super thin or really, really thick to stand out. And then I can choose what color I want that border to be. So definitely kind of open-ended there. You can choose from a multitude of different options, and there's really a limitless amount for you to choose from. On the left-hand side, we're also going to have that padding and margin here as well. And then you can select a font. So if you want one font for every different element that you're going to have on your form, for uniformity's sake, I would highly recommend doing so. You can click onto the select font button here, and that font selector will appear for you to select those fonts, just like we saw in the last modal. All right, and then once I'm done selecting all of my defaults, I'm going to go ahead and close. It's going to ask me if I want to apply these settings to every existing page in my form. So I'm going to say yes. And then it's also going to ask me if I want to apply them to the existing elements or components rather that are on the form. So these are going to be your individual fields like first name, last name, email, etc. So I'm going to say yes there. All right, and then the last thing before we actually start building out our form, on the left-hand side, we have this add page button. So you can add additional pages onto this form, so you can have a multi-page form. Most intake forms, I would say, don't necessarily have multiple pages aside from like the main page that you fill out and the thank you page. But you can definitely add additional pages on there depending on the number of data you want to include into the event. So in addition to that, this would be a really great option if you're doing, let's say, a follow-up survey or a poll option. So you can have a different page for each kind of section of questions, if you will. All right, so then over here on the right-hand side is our page editor. So think about this kind of in the same way that you would your worksheet. You're going to be adding elements or components or sections, if you will, if we're comparing it to the worksheet. And then for each one of those, you're going to have a series of different mapping options. So here on my heading, every form that you start with is going to start with a heading field and an email address field. The email address field is a required field. You cannot remove it. It's what's going to differentiate between this information populating into the same event every time, or if it's going to create a new event because it's a new email address. So the email address is very important here. You're going to want to make sure that that is properly mapped as well. So we'll go over that in just a moment. To start off with, on your heading here, you can definitely click into what I like to call, I'm calling it the DJ board because it just looks like a DJ board, if you will. And it's going to pop up with our modal here for you to select some different options. So the first of which is going to be to name your heading. So maybe this is going to be Brandy's Flowers. I can then also choose the type. So maybe I want that to be super, super big, or I can make it smaller if I'd like. I also have my alignment options. So if I want that left aligned, right aligned, or centered. Title case means, so title case is going to be like capitalizing the first letter in every word. Then I can also choose a background image. So I know you're thinking, okay, well, we've already chosen a background image. Why would I want to do that? So for each element, you can also have a background image for it as well. So let's say, for example, you have your main background image, but then on top of that, you want to have a nice header graphic. So you can do that here. Potentially, you could remove the verbiage altogether from the heading and just do a nice, let's say, graphic here that would have Brandy's Flowers on it. And you can make it with a nice background and, really make it your own. We also have different options for text color and background color. So again, I know you're saying, well, we just did this in our defaults. So we have our set of defaults there for you to do, which is going to be for every element or component that you have here on the form. But you can also choose to change out the text color, background color per element as well. So let's say, for example, I want the text color on my heading to be different than, let's say, all of the text colors on my fields. I can do that. Same thing with background color. In the general section here, it's very similar to what we just saw in our defaults. Again, this is going to be in the case that you wanted to change something per element as opposed to using what you have in your defaults. And then I would just close that and it would automatically populate in my new heading there. I also feel that everybody should have their logo on all of your forms. Branding is key. So if I go into the add element section here, it's going to pop up with a modal with a variety of different options for me to choose from, one of which is going to be company logo. So when I click on company logo, it's going to automatically add in whatever the logo is for my company. I can also choose to change out my height there. So if I wanted that to be a little bit smaller, I can do left align, right align, or centered. And then again, I can also change out my padding, margin, border style, etc. Go ahead and just change this to maybe 250. All right, so then I can go ahead and drag and drop my different sections around. So on the very left-hand side, I'm going to see those 4 arrows here. I'm going to click and hold to drag and reorder this. So now you can see I've got my logo there at the top. Maybe I don't like it on the left. I want to go ahead and align it to the center. I can do that as well. All right, next, maybe I have my my logo in there, but I don't necessarily let's say on this one, I have a white background here, which is great for the proposals because that section is going to be white behind it. But maybe I wanted to use a different photo without changing what my company logo is. So you can also add a new element and go into image. And that will allow you to click into our little DJ board here and choose an image there. The image component is also a great option. So if you wanted to, let's say, show off some of your work, maybe a previous bouquet you've made, a previous, centerpiece, boutonniere, if you wanted to just give like a brief this is kind of the style that I have. You can go ahead and put in some images there, and it would populate here on your form. So great way to kind of pre-upsell, if you will. All right, so let's go ahead and get down to individual sections here. So in my email address section here, if I go into my little DJ board, I can go in and I can set the value. So right now my label is email address. This is where I want my client to enter their email. But in addition to that, I want to go a step further and make sure that it's mapped into the event. So while your form may be set to create an event, you're going to need to map those fields into the fields that you would like them to populate into from the event. So in this case, if I want to set my value, it's going to be contact email. So now every time my client fills out this form, it's going to automatically populate whatever they put into this field into the contact email field in within the event, or the contact info record, as it were. Again, just like we saw in the previous one, it's going to have those background color options and then also our general options here. And then by closing that field, it's going to automatically update that. If I go add a new element, maybe I want to have columns. So if I wanted to do columns here, I can go ahead and pull in my email address field, and now I've got columns. So I can do first name, last name, city, state. So I'm going to go ahead and do add new. And in this case, I'm going to do an input box. So the input box, I would say, is most similar to a category group in a worksheet. It's got the most customization, the most mapping options. So if we go in here to edit this first one that I'm going to put in here is going to be the name field. So I'm going to go ahead and put in the input type as text. Other input types that we have are going to be email address, phone number, US phone, and URL. So you can put any one of those different types of fields. Something to note though, if I pick a number field, they're not going to be able to put in their name there. It's going to need to be a text field. Same thing with the US phone. If I put in a US phone there and what they enter is not a set of numbers, it's not going to take it. All right, so my field name here is going to be client name. My label is also going to be client name. When we talk about what a field name is versus a label, so a field name, think of this as like what you're reading on the back end. When you go look at the submission for this particular client, it's going to say the field name. But when your client actually views the form, they're going to be seeing the label. I personally like to have them both the same, but you can definitely have them completely opposite or different if you'd like. My apologies. Let me go ahead and turn this on. Sorry about that. All right, so here on my placeholder, I'm probably not going to put anything here in the placeholder for the client name. It's pretty self-explanatory. If this was a question that maybe required a little bit more instruction on what they needed to put there, I could put in like a placeholder there as well. On the layout here, so there's two different options for how you want your fields to lay out. So possibly it's going to be a side-by-side. If we look over here on the right, how we have our email address and then the field is right next to it, that's going to be a side-by-side. If I wanted it to be stacked, that means that my label is going to be here and the field where they would actually enter in their data is going to be right below that. Next, I'm going to want to go ahead and set my value. So in this case, because I'm not going to have a separate first name, last name field, I'm going to just have one. I'm going to go ahead and do the contact name first, last. You may want to go ahead and put first, last in the placeholder, kind of up to you then. The last thing here is, do you want this field to be required? Is that something that you necessarily need, or it's just information you'd like from the client? For the client name, I'm going to say it's probably like a required field. Right, and then I'm going to close that out and we'll see that now I have my client name and email address. So I have a couple different options here. I can continue going down the different columns, or I can make multiple columns here. So where it kind of gets sticky as far as doing, let's say, multiple fields in the one column section is when you go do a mobile view. And of course, always recommend that you check and make sure that this looks good on mobile view. And there is a way to do this here in the preview, which we'll go over once we're finished. On mobile view, what it's going to do is it's going to take column A and column B, and it's just going to go like this. So though you have, let's say, first name, last name, it's not going to necessarily go first name, last name when you do mobile view in that case, because it's just going to take column B and put it right underneath column A. So I would highly recommend doing multiple column fields in that case. That'll make a little bit more sense when I go over to the preview. All right, so here on the add new element section, again, I'm going to go ahead and select a couple more options. So the next thing that's most important to me is probably going to be a phone number. I want to be able to contact these people. I want to be able to follow up, etc. So I'm going to go ahead and do a column, and then I'm going to go to add new and then input box. Again, I'm going to go in to edit that. And for this one, I'm going to say phone number. I'm also going to make my backend field name phone number as well. And I want to, again, make sure that that input type is set to US phone. If you are not in the US, you could definitely do it as a number field. And that way you can put in, whatever numbers are applicable for your country. All right, so then again, I'm probably going to want to make this a required field just because I need to be able to follow up with you. Phone number, placeholder, maybe I want to go in here and put kind of the format that I'm looking for. Again, up to you. I'm going to stick with the side by side. I would recommend that in most cases, you do all of your fields the same layout. But again, up to you. I'm going to set my value here now as my contact phone. You'll also notice that with this input type, I have the option to do that contact phone too. As we know, in the contact record, there is an option to put 2 phone numbers in there. So you can do phone number 1, phone number 2, home phone, mobile phone, etc. With every field that's on this form, any field type is going to also give you the option to do an event custom property. If you're not familiar with custom properties, they allow you to do so many things. Custom properties are just that. They're very custom. They can be anything and everything that you want them to be, and they're very open-ended. To learn more about custom properties, I would recommend going into the support center and searching for custom property, and you'll find that article there if you wanted to learn a little bit more about that. For now, I'm just going to go ahead and click my value as the contact phone number, and I'll click out. So next, I'm going to go in here and add new, and maybe I want to have their address. I can go into my input box. I'm going to go into my editing. In this case, it's going to be a text field. Okay, and then here, there's a couple of different ways I can do this. So if I wanted to do it as a contact address, just blanket, I want the whole shebang. I want your street address, name, city, state, zip, all in one. I can do that through contact address. Maybe I want to do a multitude of different forms. So I want to have contact address is just going to be, 123 Easy Street. And then I would have city, state, zip, country. And there would be 4 fields. So up to you how you want to do it. For the sake of time for our tips and tricks webinar today, we're just going to do a blanket contact address. All right, so then on my next element, I'm going to, again, go ahead and start with a column to just kind of keep up what I've already got going here. I'm going to click on the Add New button. And then from there, I'm going to go in here, and probably the next thing is going to be my date. So I want to know when their event date is. I'm going to go in here, and I'm going to edit this field. And again, I'm going to go ahead and put event date. All right, so you'll notice that with each new field, you're going to get a slightly different set of options. In this case, we have that US holidays option. If you're not in the US, you may not want that to show up. We do plan on adding some additional countries in there and their special holidays. So if that's something that you are wanting, please let us know. We'd be happy to put your name on that list for whenever that feature comes out. As the set value, I'm going to go ahead and put in event date. And then I'm going to make this one required. Okay. All right. And then I'm going to go ahead and add in my next field. So I'm probably going to say that my next most requested thing is I want to know how many people it's going to be for. So I'm going to go into input box again. I'm going to edit this. All right. So, you know, most people probably are not going to have an exact guest count when they come to you initially, which is fine. So I'm just going to put that approximate label on there. I'm going to go ahead and set this as a number input type. I'm going to go ahead and put event guest count. Though this is important to me, I don't know that I necessarily need to make it required because I'm going to have that first meeting with them and we're going to discuss all that when we get there anyway. So just depending on your business model, I'm going to go ahead and leave it not required for now. All right, so then next, I'm probably going to want to know when and where. So I'm going to go ahead and add in my column. The first thing I want to do is I'm going to go ahead and put a time input field. So if I go in here to edit this, maybe I want to do event start time. Again, this may or may not be something that they already know, so I'm not going to make it a required thing. My value here, I've got a ton of different options. So as you can see, you can really get customizable about, do I need to know when the photographer is going to be there? Do I need to know when the setup is going to be available? Are these things relevant for me to know right off the bat? I would say more is more in this case. If they don't fill it out, that's fine. I wouldn't make it a required field unless it's something that's, you know, very, I need to know right now. The photographer start time, I would say, is probably not something I need to know. But I'm going to go ahead and do event ceremony time here, and then I'm going to keep that as a side-by-side, and it's not going to be a required field. Next, I'm going to go down and I'm going to click on add new again. And now I want to talk about the location. So this is going to be an input field. I'm going to go in and edit that. So maybe I want this to be event location. All right, and then I'm going to leave that as a text. And for my value here, I'm going to go ahead and select the event ceremony location. Again, if this is going to be your generic intake form, you might want to leave it a little bit more, you know, generic. But if you're wanting it to be like a wedding intake form, maybe you want to have ceremony start time and location, reception start time and location, you know, cocktail start time and location. You might even need some additional fields. So in that case, you can utilize those custom properties as well. And then next, I'm going to go ahead and add a new element, and I'm going to again do those columns. So because this is just going to kind of be a general intake form, I'm not going to put too much more on here. I'm going to go ahead and add new, and let's say I want to know their color scheme. So on the color selector here, this is really, really, really awesome. So up until now, users of details were the only ones that had access to our color palette. But now your client is going to be able to select their colors for the event from the color selector, just like you guys see on the back end. And that's going to automatically populate into the event worksheet. So I'm going to go in here and select event colors. That's going to be my label. I'm also going to make that my field name. And then I'm going to map that directly into my event colors. This is the only field that you don't have an option for custom properties on, just because it's more of an image field. And so therefore, it's not going to populate into a custom property. All right, so I'm going to close that. And then the last thing that I'm going to add that I really want everybody to be aware is available. If I go to add new, I'm going to go to input box, edit, and I'm going to go ahead and add in here Pinterest inspiration board link. So this is going to allow your client to automatically enter in their Pinterest link. You can then go ahead and map this directly into a custom property. So that way that client's Pinterest board is already going to be there. You can click into it and go directly into their Pinterest board, and you're there. So I'm going to go ahead and name the custom property Pinterest. I might even want to say Pinterest link or Pinterest board, inspiration board. It may not necessarily be Pinterest. This is going to be an open-ended option for you to put in a URL, or for your client to, rather. So if they have other web-based documents, like a Google Doc or a sheet or something to that effect, that they want to give you access to, something that's web-based that you can link from a URL, any of that can be put in to a URL, and you can have a field there for them to enter that in. So I'm going to go ahead and close this. All right, so for the sake of time, I'm going to go ahead and say this is going to be my full finished form. As you can see, if I click onto any one of the add new buttons, there's a variety of different options here. Each one of these fields is going to have a multitude of different options for you to basically customize that field. Once I'm done though, I can go ahead and click on the save button. And just like you see on the worksheet, you're going to get that save as modal. So first I'm going to want to save this as a new version. So maybe this is just going to be my first draft of this particular form. And I'm going to go ahead and save that. Additionally, if I wanted to utilize this form, again, maybe I want to make a secondary form and just change a few things, I can do that as well. So I'm going to go ahead and click on my save button again, and I can go in and save that as a new template. So maybe this is just going to be my basic template. Let's say, there we go. And then I can save that. For any one of these different sections that I wanted to basically load in a template, or maybe go back to a previous version, etc., I can go into the menu button, and then I'm going to go into either load template or load version. So very similar to how you would on the worksheet there. If I go into load template, it's going to have that template there for me to load in. All right, so now that I'm done with that, the next step is going to be to preview this. So if I go in to preview this specific form, in the upper left-hand corner, I'm also going to see my options to view it on different devices. So this is where you're really going to be able to see, okay, what is my client going to see if they go in and view it on their phone? What's my client going to see if they're viewing it on a tablet? What about if they're viewing it on a computer? So you can go in here and change those up so you can see the different styles basically that they'll see when they go on to each device. All right, so once I am fully and completely, yes, this is exactly what I wanted to do, I can go ahead and activate that form. So to do that, I'm going to go back to my forms list here. And then on my forms list, I'm going to go ahead and go into that form and make it active. So for any one of my different forms here that I wanted to make active, I would just go in and click on the active button here. In this case, I've already made it active, so I don't need to worry about that, but that's where you would go if you needed to make that active. You can also go into there and change the tokens that are creating your event name. You can change your slugs, change pretty much anything from that first create new form modal that we saw. You can change that by clicking on the little paper and pencil here. In order to view my form though, I'm going to click on the eyeball. the eyeball is going to take me directly over into what my client is going to view. This is the link that I will use in order to go to this form or for my client to go to this form. If you have a subdomain or a custom vanity URL, as it were, instead of saying portal.details.flowers, it's going to say, let's say, brandysflowers.floral.design. And then it would say /form and then a bunch of numbers. So I would say it's pretty important as far as branding standings go, to go ahead and get your custom URL. If you don't already have your custom URL, you can definitely go ahead and get one. I'll show you how you can do that in just a moment. But from here, this is what your client is going to see. They'll be able to go in and fill out all of the information about themselves, their event. So anything that you've added on there, you'll just go ahead and add that here into your fields. As far as what the client sees when they're clicking on the event colors here, so it's going to be very, very similar to what we have on our back end. There are a few less options just to make it a bit less overwhelming, if you will. But they do have the option to input a color from a code. They can pull one from an image. Can also see suggestions, and then they can also choose from quick colors as well. So wonderful there. And then it's going to populate here onto my form just as you see here. So once they submit that form, I got to put in my required fields. All right, and then I'm going to select my event date there. All right, so then I'm going to submit it. You know, it's only not working because everybody's here on this, here on our webinar. Okay. Well, once they submit it, they're going to go into our form responses here. So if I go into any one of my forms here that have a response, it's going to look exactly like this page. So I'm going to have all of my submissions for that particular form listed here as well. So it's going to have their email address, the date that they responded and time, the status. So this would be like if they maybe only filled out a portion of the form and then they left the page, maybe they filled out 75% of it, 25, it's still going to collect that data. So then I've also got how complete they are and then what form version. So it's going to keep track of, okay, they filled out the version from October 22nd, or they filled out the version from November 17th. So it's going to keep track of that information as well. For any one of these, though, I'm going to go ahead and click into that field, and it's going to take me over to the responses for that form. So once this loads here, so it's going to list out every single one of the forms or the fields that you had on your form, what they responded, so what they entered into that field, where it's supposed to map to, and then the field type. You can also go in directly to the client record from this page or directly into the event from this page as well. All right, so that concludes our tips and tricks webinar for today. This feature is going to be released to our beta testers today. And then everyone else, it's going to be out probably later this month, early next month, just to give you kind of a timeline, but not really an exact date on that. Anybody who is interested in learning more, please let me know. And then if you have any questions, just let me know that as well.